So, I'd like to spend a little bit of time today talking about Lo-Debar, L-O-D-E-B-A-R. It's a place mark on the map of Israel as it existed about 3,000 years ago. It's only mentioned to my knowledge at one time in the Bible, and it has no real bearing in and of itself. When I looked up the word and tried to come up with a definition of it, I actually came up with three definitions: no water, no pasture, and no voice. The only reason this place is important is because of a rather obscure man who lived and was actually hiding out there. His name was Mephibosheth. If you combine Mephibosheth with the place on the map in the wastelands of Israel called Lo-Debar, even if you're a fairly serious student of the Bible, the chances are it has no meaning for you. But taken in combination in the context of the way the story played out 3,000 years ago, it has dramatic implications for us today, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But first I want to make a comment on our legal system currently in the United States. Back in the 1970s, my wife and I bought a home in the state where we lived then and still live. At the time, we filled out a purchase contract for the purchase of the property, and it was on a state-approved contract form, which most people use. That contract consisted of 2 pages, front and a back. The print was small, but it was legible. It wasn't what I would call fine print. Last year, I was involved in several real estate transactions for the purchase and sale of residential real estate in the same state, using state-approved forms again. The last purchase contract a year ago was 9 pages long, and that was only the basic contract. There was 2 addendums totaling another 5 pages, and there was 2 notices of disclosure totaling yet another 5 pages, for a total of 19 pages, all incorporated into the contract for the sale of one parcel of real estate. Explain to me, if you can, why we went from a 2-page purchase contract in the 1970s to 19 pages in 2014. I actually know the answer. The answer is you cannot hire enough attorneys to anticipate all the reasons a person might want to change their mind and get out of a contract. All you can do is try to anticipate loopholes and to try and close those loopholes so that once a person enters into a contract, they're bound by it. The problem is people aren't bound by contracts anymore. And this is a heart of the instruction I want to try and get at today. If you remember nothing else from this video, please remember this: the strength of any contract does not reside in how many attorneys you hire to enforce it, or in how many loopholes you try and close by incorporating provisions into the written contract. At the end of the day, the strength of any contract resides in the character and the integrity of the persons entering into it. And that's really what I want to talk about today. Back to Lo-Debar. As far as we know, because this was not a major city, it was an obscure place. It looks like it was out in the hinterlands on the east side of the Jordan River, out in the wastelands. When you combine as a composite those definitions of no water, no pasture, and no voice, you come up, at least I do, with the impression of a wasteland, somewhere out in the canyons where the wind is echoing through and not much else. Furthermore, it was undoubtedly out by the borders of the frontiers of Israel, close to their enemies, the Moabites and Edomites and the Ammonites. If a person was running and hiding, this would be the place to go, but you can only go so far before you get into enemy territory. This place became important because of a person that was hiding out there whose name was Mephibosheth. He had the bad luck of being in the line, the royal line of Israel. He was a descendant of the first king of Israel, King Saul, and would have been in the lineage of that royal line, and actually a possible successor to Saul or one of his sons to be king. The problem is he was crippled. When he was a small baby, his nurse dropped him and broke both of his feet, so he couldn't run. He had to literally be carried or walk on crutches. The fact that he got himself across the Jordan River away from the centers of power and was hiding out near the borders in Lo-Debar, in a wasteland where nobody goes without a good reason, is telling. And what it's telling is he was there because he was hiding out. The reason for that is there was a civil war in Israel. His grandfather, Saul, was deposed as king. His father, Jonathan, was also killed in battle and not eligible to be king anymore. There was a civil war between Mephibosheth's uncle, who would have been king and was next in the lineage, but he was deposed by what some would call an interloper. There was a new king and a new lineage now. And if you know anything about history, you'll know that royalty and power deals harshly with threats. Mephibosheth's very existence in the lineage of the old dynasty posed a threat symbolically and materially to the new king. And so Mephibosheth was out here hiding out, and his biggest fear was that he would be found by the new king and brought in and killed, frankly, and eliminated. So he probably woke up every day and peeked outside to see if the king's men had found him. He'd run as far as he could. He had broken ankles. He was crippled. It's not like he could get on a horse and cover a lot of ground. If he'd gone much further, he'd be in enemy territory and he'd be subject to being killed by the Ammonites, Moabites, or Edomites and the enemies of Israel who congregated along the borders. So there he sat. The problem is, one day his worst fear came true. He looked out his window in the morning and saw soldiers surrounding his house, and they summoned him out and said, "The king wants to see you." This should have been a death warrant, but it was at this point that Mephibosheth caught a bit of luck, because David was no ordinary king. The new king was the hero of Israel. This was the same David who years ago had took on a 9-foot giant, killed him with a sling, and routed the Philistine army and gave Israel a great victory. He'd gone on to be a warrior hero of Israel until the existing king Saul became jealous and tried to kill him. He spent about 13 years, David did, on the run from Saul, hiding out and trying to avoid being killed himself. So what's going on? When Mephibosheth was brought before the king, David, the first word that's out of David's mouth was, "Don't be afraid." Instead of having Mephibosheth killed, he adopted him into his household and gave him a seat at the table. in a place in his family. Why would he do that? That's really the heart of what we want to talk about this morning.